Hi, and welcome to this second part of the Aqua Park double page spread from A Million Little Monsters by Lulu Mayo. In the first part, I already showed you the criteria I used to choose my colors and how I placed them. And in this part, I'm going to show you how I color everything in with colored pencils and which embellishments I use at the end. If you're new to this channel, hi, my name is Ina. If not, welcome back. For this page, I'm using the Castle Art Soft Touch colored pencils. But just like in the first part, you can of course use whatever you have at home. I color everything by color, so I start with one color that I had already chosen in the last video, and then move on to the next, and so on. I start by reworking the sky, using a second layer of Castle Art's watercolor pencils, this time on a palette, but the rest are regular colored pencils. While I was coloring the double page, a question came to mind due to current events, one that I once heard in a coloring tag. I can't remember exactly which one it was. Probably I just watched a video and thought about what my own answers would be. I don't think I participated on the tag. In any case, the question was, which coloring book would you save in a fire? I'm aware that the question is really about which book I would save if I could only take one, and not necessarily about an actual scene where there's really a fire. But since there are currently forest fires, including a very large one in Belgium near the German border, I did start to think about what I would really save in such a situation. Would it be coloring materials or other things? That's what I want to talk about a bit in this video. What my thoughts were on that and which situation in my hometown moved me emotionally. First of all, you really have to distinguish what kind of fire it is. If you are suddenly surprised by a fire that breaks out in your home, then a coloring book is definitely not something you should be trying to save. Your first priority must be your own life and that of your housemates, whether they are human or pets. The advice is always to leave the house as quickly as possible and call the fire department. But if it is a forest fire, like the one near the Belgian border to Germany, it is a different matter. Some people had to leave their houses, and in the end they apparently had about 10 minutes to do so, according to the media reports I read. Still, these people knew that a forest fire was approaching their homes, which means they were not completely unprepared. They may have already had time to pack a few things and think about what they would take with them if it came to that. They could also have, as a precaution, already loaded their car with as much as they wanted to save. That is, of course, a completely different situation than if a fire breaks out suddenly without any warning. Even so, it is terrible that there are forest fires, some of which are probably caused by human negligence, and that huge forest areas are burning down that have grown over decades or even centuries. Among other things, I also read that a millennia-old book was irretrievably destroyed by the fire. It's shocking to see that drought alone, or in combination with one small human mistake, can lead so much consequences. As far as I heard, the houses that were evacuated did not burn down, and the residents were able to return. But at the time I'm recording this, the fire is still not 100% under control. However, there was another reason why I was thinking about the question regarding the book. And that one is much closer to me. Here in Hamburg, people had to leave their homes reportedly within 10 minutes due to the risk of collapse. It was a building with several flats. At the end of July, cracks were discovered on the facade, and presumably the reason was simply that the landlord had neglected the building for a long time and had not maintained it. The house must have been a risk of collapse for quite some time, because there was no trigger, such as an earthquake or anything like that, which caused it. Luckily, nothing happened earlier and no one was injured. The residents really had to leave their homes from one moment to the next and had to leave almost everything behind. Basically, their whole lives. And this happened without any natural disaster, but presumably just because of a lack of maintenance. An inspection revealed that the rear part of the apartment building could no longer be supported. As I said, the people had to leave their homes within the shortest possible time. And I'm not sure whether they knew at that moment that they would never be able to return, or if they thought it would somehow be made safe and then they could go back. That part of the house has now been demolished, and the residents could only take with them the belongings that make up their lives if they could grab them in the short time they had and carry them all at once, because they were not allowing to go back into the building once they were out. It really shocked me to see that people truly had to leave their lives behind. Of course, if there's a fire, things burn and are gone, or at least damaged by the fire. But in this case, all the belongings were still in perfect condition, completely usable. Yet, because they were not allowed to return to their homes, all those items, whether keepsakes, clothing, furniture, are simply gone. And that thought is really quite terrible. Of course, there are people who are hit much harder due to war or natural disasters. But in this situation, where that isn't the case, I still find it shocking that the flats were simply demolished with all the personal belongings, keepsakes, and everything else inside. It really affected me. Just imagine you only have 10 minutes to quickly grab a few things and everything else is simply gone, even though it isn't damaged by a fire or anything like that. What would you grab in that moment if you only had 10 minutes? I would probably already need 10 minutes just to get my cats into their carriers. Apart from that, I would probably grab a few clothes, my phone, wallet, and things like that. Maybe my laptop and perhaps external hard drives with important data on them. And for keepsakes like photo albums, there would probably be neither the time nor the opportunity to just take them along. Yet, these are probably the things that hurt the most when they are gone, because you simply cannot buy them again. Especially older photos from childhood or older family members from a time before digital photography can't just be reprinted. They would really be gone, as if your entire childhood was wiped out in the worst case. And as I said, of course, there are far worse things like wars and natural disasters that affect people. I don't know if I would even think about coloring books in such a situation. I don't think so. There are now media reports that after the demolition, the rubble is being transported by trucks to a nearby site, where the people are allowed to sift through the piles of debris to see if they can find any of their belongings. The chances are, of course, low, since the items were buried under the rubble and have now been moved and shifted again. After spending several days in hotels with the family or with friends, these people have now been offered a flat about 1 kilometer from the old homes, where they can stay for up to 2 years. But it will still take some time before they can move in. Of course, they now have no possessions at all, no furniture, no clothes except for the few items they were wearing and could grab in a hurry. The children have no toys. They have nothing left, and the question is whether anyone will compensate them. If so, probably not fully, since insurance usually pays the current value rather than the replacement cost, which is much less than what would be needed to buy everything new. I feel incredibly sorry for these people. They lived not far from me, and it's really shocking that something like this can even happen here. In fact, the house has not been completely demolished so far, only the rear part. The front facing the street is still standing. Whether that part can be preserved still has to be checked. But first, the remaining rubble has to be completely cleared. There are also media videos showing the open building where you can see all the tenants' personal belongings still inside, in the half of the flats that have not been demolished. If the residents are very lucky, they might eventually be able to retrieve the rest of the belongings from their flats once it is secured. But that is still uncertain. The people living in the neighboring houses also had to move out, as the buildings are directly adjoining. I'm not sure whether they have been allowed to return yet, or if there is still a risk there. I don't assume that anyone from the coloring community was among those affected. But I would somehow be quite curious whether anyone managed to take anything hobby related with them in those 10 minutes. I think that in the midst of desperation and all the things you have to organize in such a situation, it might actually help to have a familiar and beloved pastime in the evening. Something that distracts you from all the problems. As you might have seen already in the video, my white colored pencil is now very short and I don't know how much longer I can still sharpen it. Also, it doesn't fit in my pencil extender since the Castle Art Soft Touch are somehow too thick. So I actually need a replacement in the form of a polychromos. But to get to the art supply shop, I would have to pass by the house I mentioned. And somehow I don't like the idea of that. It's probably complete nonsense because thousands of cars probably drive past it every day. But I would somehow feel like a starer. When you drive past, you automatically look over. And somehow I would feel bad buying something as unimportant as a colored pencil while there are people who have lost all their belongings and their homes. Of course, I have nothing to do with the situation and probably shouldn't be thinking like that. I also simply haven't had the time to go there yet. And there's still a little bit of the pencil left for now. So I still have some time. I don't know if my thoughts are in any way interesting for you. If you can imagine what that is like, and if the thought of people losing everything in a situation that is actually very privileged, where you would really not expect something like this, also affects you somehow. But to come back to the question from the beginning, which coloring book I would save from my collection if I could only save one, completely independent of the situation, it would probably be Seasons by Hannah Carlson, because the book is no longer available to buy, and I could probably easily repurchase most of the others. Write in the comments which coloring book would you save, and what things might be even more important to you. Are they photo albums or other keepsakes? Or maybe something completely different? But as I said, if there's a fire, don't waste any thoughts on coloring books. Save your life. Fortunately, it's currently not so hot and dry anymore. And next week we can enjoy summer again with pleasantly warm but not too hot temperatures. And with that, I'll get back to this fun double page spread. That was enough negativity for this video. So, I've finished coloring everything here. And now only the details and highlights are missing. I'm starting with a few gel pens from Avec, specifically the glitter gel pens. First, I use a yellow glitter gel pen to color in the eyes of the green monsters. Then I use silver for the outline of the portholes. I try as much as possible to use the colors I already used on the page. Next, I use a green glitter gel pen for the other eyes. The ones that aren't black, but where you can see an iris. But I leave the cloud's iris simply white. Now I use pink for the horns. The pink looks very neon, but since I've started with it, I'll continue. I combine the pink with a glittery orange gel pen. On one of the monsters, I had forgotten a bit of yellow, so I quickly fixed that. For the tambourine, I also add a bit of beige and yellow. And then I use a silver gel pen for the tambourine jingles. Next, I use a water-based glitter marker from Deco Time. I didn't want such a neon tone, so I choose a very light purple. But it turned out to be too light. Then I went over it again with pink, which was still not noticeable enough. And finally, I layered yellow on top. Now we move on to the highlights, for which I use my white Posca marker. I cover up the lines of the clouds as well as the lines representing the movement of the water. On the waves, I leave the black lines, except for the single line right at the front of the wave. All the eyes also get a highlight, which immediately makes all the characters look much livelier. Coloring this tropical summer page was a lot of fun, and now the double page is finished. I'll show it to you up close. I hope you enjoyed the video, and feel free to let me know in the comments whether little thoughts like in this video interests you. Bye and see you next time.